Antwinter. What if one of history's most infamous dictators wasn't just fighting his enemies, but also his own body? Behind the grand speeches, the fanatic crowds, and the iron will of Adolf Hitler lay a hidden dependency, one that may have fueled his paranoia, his aggression, and his eventual downfall. From stimulants that kept him awake for days to narcotics that numbed his pain, Hitler's drug addiction offers a disturbing glimpse into how chemistry shaped the mind of a man who changed the world forever. This is the story of how addiction infiltrated the Nazi leadership, how Hitler's personal doctor became his enabler, and how drugs may have steered some of the deadliest decisions in modern history. The world that shaped the addiction. To understand Hitler's drug dependency, we need to go back to where it all began: Germany after World War I. It was a nation defeated, humiliated, and economically shattered. Hyperinflation left people carrying wheelbarrows of money just to buy bread. Amid despair and anger, Adolf Hitler emerged as a voice of rage and redemption, promising a new Germany built on strength and unity. But beneath the chaos of post-war life ran another current, one of chemical experimentation. Early 20th century Germany was a pharmaceutical powerhouse. Drugs like cocaine, morphine, and heroin were widely prescribed for fatigue, pain, and depression. Even ordinary citizens turned to tonics and injections that promised vitality and focus. By the late 1930s, a new stimulant swept across the country: Pervitin, a brand of methamphetamine. Marketed as a harmless pick-me-up, it was sold to housewives, students, and, eventually, soldiers. When the Nazi war machine roared to life, millions of meth tablets were handed out to troops, keeping them alert and aggressive during the lightning-fast blitzkrieg campaigns. In a nation obsessed with energy, health, and performance, drug use wasn't seen as a vice. It was science in service of victory. And in Hitler's own life, that same obsession would become something far more dangerous. The doctor behind the dependency. At the center of Hitler's growing drug habit stood one man, Dr. Theodor Morell. Morell was a peculiar figure, plump, eccentric, and often disheveled. Many in Hitler's circle despised him, calling him a quack. But to Hitler, he was indispensable. The Führer suffered from chronic stomach pains, exhaustion, and severe insomnia, and Morell claimed to have the cure. Their professional relationship began in the mid-1930s. Soon, Morell was giving Hitler daily injections filled with vitamins, hormones, and mysterious concoctions. At first, these seemed to work. Hitler felt stronger, more focused, and more energetic. But hidden among the vitamins were far stronger substances: methamphetamine, barbiturates, and opioids such as Eucodal, a powerful synthetic similar to heroin. As the years went on, Hitler's reliance deepened. By 1942, he was receiving multiple injections per day, often before key military briefings or speeches. Witnesses described a sudden transformation: lethargy replaced by manic bursts of energy, fatigue replaced by a kind of mechanical enthusiasm. But the effects were temporary. When the drugs wore off, he became irritable, paranoid, and withdrawn. Those close to him noticed the pattern: intense highs followed by violent lows. His decisions grew more erratic, and his temper more explosive. By 1944, Hitler's physical and mental state was visibly deteriorating. His hands trembled uncontrollably, his skin turned pale and waxy, and his energy depended entirely on Morell's injections. Even his generals whispered that the Führer was no longer the man he once was. For all his talk of racial purity and moral discipline, Hitler had become something he despised: a man enslaved by his own chemical addiction. As Hitler's dependence grew, so did its impact on his leadership. In the early years of the war, when the German army swept through Europe with astonishing speed, Hitler seemed unstoppable. His manic energy and confidence inspired fear and loyalty in equal measure. But beneath that apparent vitality was the steady drip of methamphetamine and opiates coursing through his veins. As the war turned against Germany, the consequences became clear. After the defeat at Stalingrad in 1943, Hitler's behavior grew increasingly unstable. He refused to allow retreats, insisting that his armies hold their ground no matter the cost. Some historians believe his overconfidence and inability to face reality were symptoms of drug-induced delusion, an artificial sense of invincibility fueled by stimulants. Generals who worked closely with him began to notice. Heinz Guderian, one of Germany's top military strategists, described Hitler as living in a world of his own. Albert Speer, his armaments minister, recalled meetings dominated by mood swings, moments of euphoria followed by sudden despair. These extremes mirrored the cycle of stimulant highs and opioid crashes. Even as the war collapsed around him, Morell continued his injections. When Hitler was too exhausted to stay awake, Morell sedated him. When he was too weak to speak, Morell gave him stimulants. The Führer's body became a battlefield of conflicting chemicals, each fighting to keep him alive just a little longer. By 1945, in the bunker beneath Berlin, Hitler was a hollow figure, trembling, paranoid, and physically broken. When he finally dismissed Morell in April, it's likely he began to suffer withdrawal symptoms. Within days, he would take his own life, leaving behind a shattered nation and an empire built on delusion. It's impossible to say whether drugs alone determined his downfall, but they undoubtedly amplified his worst impulses, his recklessness, his grandiosity, and his inability to distinguish fantasy from reality.
Adolf Hitler's end came not with a bang on the battlefield, but with the slow decay of body and mind in a concrete bunker. The man who demanded total control over his people had lost control of himself long before the final shot was fired. His story is a chilling reminder that behind even the most commanding image of power can lie fragility. Drugs gave him energy, confidence, and escape, but they also deepened his paranoia and clouded his judgment. They turned a dangerous man into something even more unpredictable. When ideology, ego, and addiction intertwine, the consequences reach far beyond one person's fate. They reshape the world around them. Understanding this side of Hitler doesn't excuse his crimes, but it does reveal how deeply human weakness can influence the course of history.
So, what do you think? Was Hitler's downfall the inevitable result of his delusions, or did his addiction push him further toward destruction? History often shows us that great power magnifies our flaws, and in Hitler's case, those flaws were chemical as much as they were moral. If you found this story revealing, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the untold corners of history. And let us know in the comments, what other hidden stories from the past should we explore next?